All right.
Hello, I'm Ziv, and this is On the Journey. Every week on the journey explores the intersections of wellness, spiritual inquiry, mental health, personal growth, and purposeful living through the eyes of the people we interview. Zane, I'd love to hear about your journey.
Hi, Ziv. Thank you for having me. I'm humbled to be here. All right. For everyone who would be watching this, my name is Zane. My full name is Zane Pierre, Zane, Zane, and I am from Trinidad and Tobago in the Caribbean. Yeah, presently, I actually identify as a pneumatologist. Right. I'm actually the founder of the International Institute of Pneumatology, as well as another entity called the ZKI Authors and Master Coaches of Pneumatology, which is where I actually function as a coach on the capacity of a master trainer, master coach. Right. Just to give some context to that, well, very briefly, because the journey could be a little bit detailed. But just to give some context, well, prior to actually me stepping into pneumatology, I grew up in a very religious home, particularly in what everybody would know as westernized evangelicalism, right? Particularly Pentecostal. I grew up in that arena, and I was pretty much taught in that atmosphere, right? I grew up in that for about 32 years, and I was actually one of those persons that was very inquisitive, curious. I grew up in that, and I was one of those persons that really, not like the average person that would go to church and be satisfied with that. They actually taught us the Bible from a very young age, and so I was one of those that actually wanted to experience what I saw in the Bible, but wasn't too sure like how that worked. And for 32 years, I could safely, with out of the 32, about 15 years out of that period of time, I was one of those that actively took what I was taught within that arena, and I put it to the test. And not to put it to the test as to prove it at that point in time, but whatever I was taught, I applied with diligence, with the hope or with the expectation of actually experiencing what the claims were, that if you do this, you'll experience this. If you do this, you have this relationship with God, and so on and so on. Right. Coming down to the end of that was actually in 2014. Now there's a lot of details here that I'm not going to be mentioning, but just to give a general idea, in 2014, after applying myself to that with no results, I had some significant life events, which were persons that were close to me, particularly at that point in time. One in particular was very significant to me was my father. He died, and that was one. Well, it's not only him, but two other persons that died not too long after, that were family members also. And at that point in time, everything that I had been taught, I actually applied, because we'd been taught about the supernatural things about God, and God will be a healer and all of these things. And I actually applied it, and to no avail. Right? When I say to no avail, I mean I applied everything that I had been taught to see what the claims were, to see if they would actually bring any change, and that was nothing at all. Right? In late 2014, I pretty much came to the point of leaving Christianity. Right? It was it was simply not. It was disappointing, to say the least. It was disappointing. It was disappointing, to say the least. At the end of 2014, I actually took a trip to. I left Trinidad and Tobago for about a month, and I went to Colombia. And in Colombia, I actually experienced something that will actually impacted me tremendously. Where, well, two things in particular. A few things took place in Colombia. But mainly, I went across there and I actually experienced some of the things that I had been told that comes with serving this God or serving Christian or functioning as a Christian. And I encountered a group of people that actually showed a difference, right? And I actually had some witness some supernatural things, and that in particular put me in a position where I began to question everything that I had been taught about Christianity, right? Within that period of time, it pretty much, I mean, given the short version doesn't give justice to this entire story that I'm giving here, but I actually came to the point where I realized that maybe what I had been taught was a lie,
Wow.
wasn't true, right? And another thing that actually stood out to me in that period of time, it pretty much put me in a mental conundrum, because if what I had been taught wasn't true, then we build our identities off of what we think we know. And therefore, if it wasn't true, then that left me in a conundrum with regards to the identity that I had built for myself. Right. Within that period of time, I came to the realization that it was something that was very significant to me within that time. It's just the timing of everything that took place. I would actually get up early in the morning in Colombia and just sit by the window. And it, within that time questioning that, it occurred to me that I'll sit by the windows and just observe the people, the behaviors, the culture, how they interacted, what was the norm, what wasn't the norm. And it occurred to me that the way that the people interacted with each other, the display of their culture, was significantly different from the culture that I am accustomed to in Trinidad and Tobago. And it occurred to me that if none of these people leave their land, they would really believe that what they know is what life is, and their norm is what life is made of. And then I realized that everybody, even though most persons may not come to that or come to that realization, that everybody has a norm, and their norm is their life. And that caused me to question, now, what about my norm? Is my norm in the spectrum of norms that exist in the world? Where does my norm fall? Is my norm favorable or advantageous norm? Is it on the lower side of the spectrum? So, for example, here in Trinidad and Tobago, vehicles such like, and this is just an example, vehicles like Mercedes Benz are vehicles that are considered high-end vehicles, whilst on the European side, there are countries that actually use Mercedes Benz as taxis. So that caused me to question, okay, so where's my norm, right? So I came back to Trinidad in January of 2015, and as I said, having experienced what I experienced, it caused me to question what I thought I knew. And so what I decided to do was to actually take before I leave Christianity completely, because it was pretty much a question is what I am doing functional or is it dysfunctional? And if it is not functioning, then it is not truth. And therefore, it should not be, it should not be something that I should be wasting time with. Right. So before I left, I actually decided I'll keep this one last straw. Right. And in this case, for the very first time that I know of personally, as well as in my life, I decided to take a pretty much a pragmatic or a scientific approach to Christianity. Right. And that meant that I would actually have to change the perspective that I would approach this book, this Bible, and identify particularly what the perspective, what is the perspective that through which the texts were written, and then I couple that with rigorous experiments, rigorous experimental testing. All right. So what in particular I was looking for was what I now identify as pneumatology, which is really identifying the spiritual mechanics of all things, right? The spiritual physics of human beings, God, the universe, creation. What was it? Because we're actually speaking about this, and everything in life has some mechanics. There is everything manifests a principle, some sort of fundamental law. And so I really set out to identify what is the fundamental law of the scriptures. And I mean, the Bible in itself has long history. So it's unfathomable for me to think that a people that would follow this book for so long, for millenniums, would actually be following it blindly, and especially because of the events that took place with the people that actually follow this book. So there must be something. So within the first 2 years in particular, that's 2015 and 2016, my first, now what I didn't mention earlier on is that before stepping into this, I have been a translator for 18 to 19 years now. Right. So what I decided to do was to apply the science of translation to the text. Right. So I began. Languages may vary, but the science of translation remains the same. So what I really needed to understand was to identify the philosophy of the language, the mechanics of the language, to be able to understand the perspective of the translators, as well as to understand what the text intends to say. Right. So I spent literally, now, because of the mental conundrum that I found myself in, I literally took a professional break, made other arrangements, and I went behind this 10 hours a day, like analyzing the original text of the Old Testament, the text of the New Testament, to be able to identify, firstly, if what we were taught is there. All right. So basically, what came out of that is I actually found what I was really looking for, right? To actually identify that the principle or the fundamental law of all things, of the human spirit and spirit in creation, was really the principle of self-existence, right? So that in particular brought some context as to how energetically how things work, how the human spirit works, how creation works. And so what I do is actually train people, or in coaching in particular, because we are in the context of coaching here, train people to be self-existent. Right. One of the things that actually came out of that is that we realized that the entire Bible was actually about the human condition, which I identify as identity codependency, where one uses external things to be able to, well, compares himself to external things to be able to identify who they are, what they are, the potential, their limitations. And so what we identified was that the spirit is meant to be self-existent. And so I teach people to live from the inside out and not use external things to be able to do that, to live. That is applied in spirituality, life. I do it with relationships also. It revolutionized relationships as well as other areas such as business in the organization and so on.
Then I don't think I know. It's my first interview where I didn't ask any question because I was so fascinated and I just wanted to hear more. I didn't want to disturb you with
No,
questions.
I must apologize. I didn't really know that.
No, that's wonderful. So we really,
Okay.
really have to finish really soon. So I will ask you one question.
What's that?
Can you choose one specific example of one thing, one exercise, or one tool, or one thing that you specifically do with someone that needs your training, help, guidance? What would it be?
A particular tool.
Yeah, particular like okay, for let's call it a regular coach, you would say, hey, we practice mindfulness. Okay, he would say we sit and we breathe and um, we observe life or breathing, or if you do so. For you, when you work with someone, when you coach someone, what do
Right.
you?
All right. Well, basically, if I'm actually coaching someone in that area with regards to any circumstance or situation that I'm dealing with, the priority basically is to firstly remove the attachments, the reference points, the external reference points that you are using to try to understand the situation, and reorientate that to understanding your spirit, your energy, and to see it self-existently, which means we identify it as an independent problem so that it can be assessed, understand what's taking place, and then make decisions from there. In summary,
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great
it's just
point.
elimination
Thank you.
of external reference points. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this interview. I think we will need to talk again to hear more. It was very, very interesting. There's so many questions I really want to ask you, but our time is up.
Okay.
Thank you a lot for your time and knowledge and experience. Thank you.
No problem. No problem. It's a pleasure to be here also.